Now today in the shop I'm trying to lay out a sequence of jobs that I want to work on. And one of the most important things, I guess, for anybody, whether you're a modeler or not, is to efficiently use your time management. Time management is so important when you want to get a lot of things done at the same time, if you want to multitask. What I always do in the beginning of every day is I try to figure out, lay out my day's work. In this case I got 2 molds to work on here. These are dry. But I can be working on the molds, get the molds prepped. I want to go back and re-wax the molds, clean them all up in the sink. They're getting kind of gushy, and this little tip I got from Ed Gallagher looks like it's going to work well. I want to clean these all up. But the point is, always plan your work day out, assuming you want to get the maximum use out of your time. I know I can get these cleaned and this wax can be drying. While that wax is drying, I can be laying out the parts of Strega, kind of looking at what I want to do next. Look at all the little pieces in the wing, and I just don't want to be doing this and then my molds aren't drying. Or in the same way, once I get to a point that something on this is drying, I can work on a Spitfire. Once I get to the Spitfire, that's something I can hopefully get the tissue on that real soon. What I'm saying is, and it's a real valid point, it's something a lot of people overlook, is at this point in the building process or in the repair process, you have what's called dry time. You get to a point where the glue is drying or the paint is drying or something. And at that point in time, you go on to your next project. But you always want to set up that the first project of the day is the one that requires the longest dry time. In my case, it's molding up the gear that takes the longest amount of dry time. Thanks to Ed Gallagher, and I feel embarrassed, he had told me this a year or two ago. He had even sent me the Part-All wax. And in my haste, I wound up using Formula 5 wax. The Part-All wax is the correct wax for these molds. Now you can see what happens. The PVA comes off in sheets like this, and it imparts a really nice finish. But the problem is, you can see what's happening is it's peeling up off the mold and other little places where it's deteriorating. So what I'm going to do now is take this over to the slop sink and clean off all the old PVA, re-wax the mold, and this is a good thing to do intermittently, at least it really should be done on a regular basis. Get all this old PVA off so that my parts don't start to assume, you know, little imperfections and things, and any little touch-ups I need to do. But the most important thing is to get that Part-All wax on there so I get a lot nicer finish on the final part, and the PVA doesn't start creeping off the mold, which is what it's doing right now. We're getting a pretty nice release on that part, and on the other side we're getting a dull carbony finish, which obviously most people would wind up painting these anyway. But these are coming out of the mold very nice now. And now that I have these coming out so well, I want to maintain the mold. I don't want to see the mold get destroyed because of lack of maintenance. There's a certain amount of mold maintenance you need to do when you're doing 2 parts a day. You see on this mold where the PVA is already tearing away. And so the trick here is to clean the whole mess off the mold, re-clean the mold, re-wax it, fix any little imperfections. This is the one we did with Brodak Dope. That's holding up very well. Still nice and smooth. Now I wiped this all down with M600. I'm going to take it out and get another coat of finishing material on there. Crude as these molds have been, or are, as the case may be, just by a little maintenance, and I'm talking about maybe a half an hour on each mold, what happens, all the little overage gets over here and it pulls up chunks of material. And what I'm also doing, I took about 10 thousandths of material off one layer at a 3-ply. Took just enough material off that these later parts will be a little bit thinner. Again, if we have, and we will have, I hope by the end of the week, we'll have our Corian mold from Jimmy. Then we can really go into full production, and that'll just be about the time when I hope we've learned as many lessons as we need to, and we can just have uneventful production. Anyway, now see, by removing just enough of the material off of these edges, my next part should be 10 thousandths thinner, Maybe I can get the weights down even lower than they are right now. Anyway, reasonable parts are coming out of this mold, though. As crude as it is, laugh all you want, it's making parts. You know, the whole object of today was to get these parts drying, and we'll take them out to the garage to dry, and then we can start laying up some of what we hope is going to be a successful repair on Strega. Now I got the molds outside drying. Now, first thing I again emphasize is you're going to do some kind of a repair or even attempt at doing it. There's always value in a used ship. There's always some value. Now, if I didn't want to repair this and have it in my Air Force, I'm sure there's people in the club that would like it. I'm sure there's people that would just like it to tear off a piece of finish and go over here and say, ooh, that's how thick that is, or that's how cute that is, or something. Anyway, one of the things I'm going to address first, again, it's that old thing of something has to always be dry. And see how we have this big crack and I can open it up and close it, open it up, close it. I'm going to mix up some real slow drying epoxy, heat it with a hairdryer, and get it to swoop down in there and clean it all off. The first step, of course, is to clean the whole plane again, even though it's been cleaned. I have some M600 on here because it really, to get all that grit and oil and everything off of here before we actually do any part of this repair. And again, we're going to try like hell to save the plane, or at least get the most value out of it that we possibly can. Keep it, in fact, even in such a way that somebody in the club can use it, or that we can continue using it for a test plane for the jet program. Again, I want to mix this up, just get as much of a mix on it as I can going here. Get a little bit of heat on it. It's the heat that'll let it. By the way, these are these little Teflon cups. A coffee can lid is a good thing too. A little bit of epoxy dye in here. Again, so that what shows through the crack isn't totally obvious as a balsa wood color. Just about the right consistency. Mix it even after you think it's mixed. Mix it some more. Play it safe. I'm putting plenty on here, believe me. Get plenty of this goop on here. And while I'm doing this, I can put the low setting on the heat down. See, when you don't have a helper in the shop, these kind of jobs get to be a little awkward, but the heat lets the epoxy soak right down into the crack. And I'm also looking around the whole plane as I go to see if I've missed any spot. Missed any crack. I'd like to seal it all up, so even if not cosmetically correct, at least from an engineering point of view, it's okay. Now you can see that epoxy is just oozing in that whole crack. Okay, you can see that's opening. Now I'm just going to have to scrape all that epoxy off. In fact, the phone's ringing. Alright, that dried up nice. Now I want to start pulling all the little, the puzzle that will become the wing here. Real careful. I want to pull off the silk span, saving all the little pieces that are underneath. Obviously we can't save the silk span, but I do want to save all of these little pieces. I don't know how many of them I'm going to need, but when you have to make one, to make this piece from scrap, oh, that's why it's so important to save all the little pieces, and we'll see what we can reconstruct here. I don't know, we need to make a seam line here where I'm going to end this. This piece is even broken. But it's always good, this is why you don't run off and do this the day an accident happens, is you get impatient, and pulling this apart Just a little time consuming, but I'd like to get I'd like to use as much of the original plane, especially being it was made out of probably what was at the time my best wood. I'd like to salvage as much of this as possible. Just dissect it piece by piece. And what's the worst that can happen if you spend a day or two and it doesn't come out the way you want? Some junior in the club, some up-and-coming guy that would never get a chance to have a big plane can basically have a free plane. So I would never be prone to put it in the garbage, that's for sure. But you can see that that finish was still pretty nice after all those years. Now I'm trying to leave as much of the finish. I like to leave a band of about 1 inch here if I can. So I'll have a solid surface and be working in the middle of it when I go to, assuming I'm going to try to blend the paint in here at some point in time. Or at least get a few up. See, there's a crack under. As we're pulling up the paper, there's exposing more damage we didn't see originally. But it's like a long ride. It's like if you go to California, it's a long ride. You got to start somewhere. You know, it's not going to happen while you're upstairs watching TV or anything. Just heard from Bill Mazzoni. He's starting to use Brodak dope, and he's got his SV11 flying well with a PA51. Look forward to seeing that. Anyway, this is just time consuming, chipping away at it until I can get as much of this off and a clean surface to work off. It's easy to do when you're doing this kind of a repair, is get all impatient and everything, and you start leaving chips around. I clean up the chips as I go, hopefully, and I try to look at this whole thing like an FAA inspector and say, oh yeah, what's going to go? I want to try to get the other side of this done now, and then again I want to just start putting my pieces back together. I want to do the same thing. I want to pull back, and I don't need to make a nice even line. The last thing, and I made this mistake time after time, I take a razor blade and score this, and I score the wood, and it puts a stress riser in the wood. So I want to put an uneven, like a zigzag, like a fabric stitch on a, on a biplane or something. So it's a jagged edge. It'll be easier to bury that edge if we get to that point that we can bury it in paint. Or some other way, but obviously the next thing I have to do is I keep forgetting I have to fix the bell crank, and I don't know, again, this is another thing I haven't thought of exactly how I'm going to go about fixing that wire, but it would look like I want to do it in a way that requires the least amount of cosmetic work. I don't want to cut the top block off the plane, for instance. I'm going to try to maybe even get in here through the side once I peel some of this covering away. See, I don't want to have just 1/4 inch of covering. I want to be able to get at least, well, half, 3/4 inch. The reason this is coming off the way it is all the center sections of these planes are double tissued. Again, if you just get this concept in your mind, a lot of things that get thrown in the garbage really are fixable. It's just a shame that a lot of people don't think that way, or they only think, well, it wouldn't be appropriate for me. A plane that's appropriate for somebody competing at the Nats, a guy that's just sport flying on Sunday morning with his buddies, having a great time. He doesn't care if there's a little scar or a Band-Aid or something on it. Hey, Old Tradition is still flying. That old blue Cardinal is still flying. The green Cardinal is still flying up in New Hampshire. I mean, they're everywhere. They're definitely going to outlive me. I often think about that. I wonder how many of these will still be flying when I'll be dead. What a hell of a thing to think about, huh? Anyway, kind of job. It's good to have one of these focal flashlights that you can adjust the range of where the light is going to go, because I want to look in there and see what else is going. You know, the problem is the bell crank is still kind of far away. There's no way without cutting the whole fuselage away I'm going to be able to get in there. Now getting in there through 3-4 rib bays, see what I'm afraid of is I don't want to disturb this sheeting cutting hatches and holes outside. So what I thought about doing, I went and had lunch just to think this through. What I'm going to try to do is cut in through the pipe tunnel and make 2 little hatches that I can get in there. And obviously I'm not going to be able to do the lead out modification that I did on a Spitfire, but I think this will be a good second choice. And boy, I really was optimistic that I'd be able to do this. I had thought about getting in here somehow, and I'm looking at it. It just really isn't going to happen. And you know, another thing too is that I'm tricking myself here. I'm thinking I'm only going to have to replace 1 lead out. That's like replacing 1 windshield wiper. So let's see what we could do as far as making a hatch in the bottom of this. It's like I don't have to worry about scratching it anyway. See, I can get this kind of jigged up here. A lot of times just handling this thing is... Now I can spot where the bell crank is right here, and I can cut a hatch. It isn't in enough parts as it is. Anyway, what I want to do, whenever you cut a hatch, you want to make the hatch, and it's tricky, you want to make it big enough you can get in with a soldering iron, benders, whatever you need to get in, but also you don't want to make it any bigger than it has to be. Now the strength from this type of wing comes from the high point of the wing. So if we have to cut 2 hatches, 1 front and 1 back, the main thing is you would never want to cut one right down the middle. That would weaken it. We're much better off with 2 smaller ones if we can get away with them. And then when we want to cut the pieces all on an angle like a cork, so that when we float them back in with epoxy, we can then glass this whole middle of the wing and maybe even add a little bit of strength. But you never, never cut that high point of the wing unless it's, boy, that gets into a high-risk area. You can actually see the bell crank bolt support, so I have a rough idea where that is, and I don't have to go all the way to the end this way. See, I'd like to maintain as much of the meat in the middle of the wing. I don't want to make the hatches come too close to the center. I want to maintain that integrity. And I want to put a pie slice in here. Again, you would think this is really going to weaken it, and that's probably true, but as long as we can maintain, and by the way, I have a piece of plywood over the high point of the wing, this will give me enough room. Notice that I'm cutting, it doesn't matter what angle I'm cutting on, but cut on an angle, not a straight 90-degree cut. And the rougher of a cut you make, back and forth, in a zigzag pattern, the better, because you can bury that in paint a lot easier than a straight line. This is probably hooked to something in there. Okay, and there's our friend the bell crank. Anyway, we'll very meticulously save this piece because we want to, when we go to float this back in, we want to really soak this with epoxy and epoxy over this whole hatch. Now we'll try doing the back one first and see how successful we are before we even cut the front hatch. I left all my paraphernalia out from the other night when I was working on a Spitfire just because I know I'm going to need it. I know I'm going to need a bunch of junk before the day that there's no point even cleaning up here. Replacing belt cranks and lead outs is a messy job.
Messy job, but Steve DeJulia has to do it.
Anyway, some M600, try to get any grease that's around this area just so this is easier to work on. Now I had originally thought I'm going to be able to get in there, pie slice that, and run a bolt through it, but I don't think that's going to work this time. Might be one of the most difficult parts of the job is to thread that lead out wire back down there, because I need this to pull a new lead out through, or to do whatever it is we're going to do here. I was amazed to find that using the 045 wire only added 3.5 grains to the weight of the plane. See, I got to make sure I thread by that gear block, that I'm not on that. I'm in a straight line. Okay, that should get us to the point where we can work on it now. Now a lot of this stuff you got to improvise. You got to make this up as you go along. There's no book on how to do this. The M600 on what amounts to be the old bad wire. So I have to abandon the idea that I'm going to put bolts in here and come up with some other solution that'll allow me to work through this hatch. And I really don't have a solution yet. Clean this up first. And let me get some forceps to work on that. I took some 045 wire, kind of made this gizmo. What I'm going to try to do is slide this down in the wing, because you won't be able to see this on a tape. Get it through the belt crank, put a brass tube here and slide the other 2 wires in there, and then bend some hooks on them and silver solder it. And I really don't have any alternative way of doing this, because I can't cut a lot more of the wood away. So I can give this a try and see if this works as one of the. You know, we're doing open heart surgery here. It's not like you have all the choices in the world. I put the piece of tubing over the lead outs that are already in the wing and put a hook on it, so I don't have to worry about that. What I need to do now is thread this through the belt crank with my forceps, and then very carefully, because this is a really tight fit. In fact, I may have to make it 1 notch bigger. Is get a tight fit on that and get some kind of a hook on this end. I don't know if you can see this. Once this is through the belt crank, I can slide this up a little bit and get some kind of a interference bend, and then silver solder the whole joint, and this will give me an 045 lead out end. Famous last words, if I can get it in there. And then I'll bend these hooks all the way back so they don't tear up the ribs. Again, this is a stopgap. This is like when you don't have any other choices in life, you know, when you're bleeding to death, you can use a piece of toilet paper for a Band-Aid, but this is the kind of thing this is. But we really are trying to save this ship if we can. What gets me through days like this is thinking of John Sandberg with the real tsunami. On that tsunami tape, when he, 3 days before Reno, they crashed and he had to improvise. I'm trying to avoid putting any sharp bends in this. This is not my first choice, by the way, but I don't know that this is even going to work, but certainly want to true this up. Now the trick will be, I have forceps here, if I can get this down through there. No, it's not going to fit. I'm going to have to trim this. It's too long, and when it comes out the bottom, it's going to come out the top of the airplane. So what I'm going to do is just trim some of this off for now. Be able to get, famous last words, I should be able to get that through. I also Took the sharp edge off of this so it'll tend to slide down, and then I have to wiggle it into that tubing with the forceps. Now you may think this is easy. This is the hard part, getting that little piece caught in there. I've chewed the whole inside of the plane up doing this. I guess nobody's going to see the inside now. This is probably one of the few planes on the whole planet that anybody ever gets to see the inside of, let alone me. Oh, okay. No, it's definitely not easy. Okay, now I'm just ready to solder that one up, and then I'll get ahead, do the front hatch. Now, one of the things we really want to be careful of is when this joint is done that we deflux it. Okay, get a nice joint on there. I want to clean that joint up, and I want to get as much of that flux off of there as I can. This is baking soda and water. Before we seal this up, we'll grease it like a greased pig. This is M600, just trying to clean up. And we'll get a nice big glob of chain lube on there. And we'll say a couple of prayers that after all this. But actually, we're on our, like a cat with 9 lives. If it goes in now, or if Kajeski crashes it or something, the world isn't going to end, that's for sure. Okay, the next step is that front hatch, and basically a repeat performance of the back, and then we'll be ready to start sealing that pipe tunnel up. Well, after all this mess, whew, boy, this is probably the single messiest job I've had to do in a long time. I want to get plenty of chain lube on here. Now, the original chain lube we put on here in 1993 is still, there's really not much play in the bell crank. In fact, there's none. And we have a bushing, a removable bushing in the flap horn so we can add or deduct play from the system. Anyway, whatever life we get out of this for a very few hours investment in time, we'll hopefully have a serviceable plane again. Plenty of chain oil. I cleaned this all up, defluxed it, and the chain oil also keeps it from oxidizing too, as a cheap insurance policy. Now the next step is going to be to seal this up. Now, I decided not to fiberglass this. That was plenty strong when I put the CA on it. Famous last words. What I want to do is just get this fuel-proofed for right now. This is just cosmetic. Keep the fuel from soaking in there. Another good test for Brodak dope, which seems to be holding up way above our wildest expectations. All this is just to get it fuel-proof for now. Now, obviously, you wouldn't want to do all the cosmetic work on a plane that had a repair like this. You wouldn't want to spend hundreds of hours doing electroset and clear and wet sanding until you flew the plane for a good, in my case, I'd be comfortable after about a month, and find out if all the structural damage is taken care of. Because if we take this out and something else happens or something breaks that was a result of the crash, we never know if it happened during the crash, before the crash. It's just difficult to tell that. So a good way to deal with that is fly the plane first. Go out and fly it for a while, and then what we try to do maybe at the end of the winter, do a lot of the real cosmetic stuff. Just get it fuel-proof enough. This case doesn't have to be too fancy either, just fuel-proof. Can happen with a crash like this. A lot of times some of the internal damage you won't see, and I've seen people already put 100 hours of finishing time in only to find out a month later that inside the wing the spar was broken or something. And until we put this all back together, I'd like to get quite a few flights on it before I'd spend any real time doing the detailing or matching the finish or something. But it's absolutely necessary to get it fuel proof, because we can always sand through these coats of dope and put on more paint, more finish. But if it's not fuel proof and the wood gets soaked, it's a mess. By the way, this paint really does cover nice. Guess you can see 1 or 2 coats and boy, we're ready. Okay, now with that whole area sealed up, I'm going to let it dry a little bit. I want to come out and start piecing together and do my jigsaw puzzle, see how much of this, if any of this jigsaw puzzle, I can get to fit. I just want to make sure I don't have any, and even if I do, it's too late now to do anything about it. I can start with all the easy joints like this one. This one will marry right up, and just tack them in with hot stuff until I can see what this is going to look like. This is a rough, that's going to be a rough thing to fix. But I can start, I'm going to try to start at the fuselage and work my way out and get all these little, as I said, I'm going to answer the phone immediately. First piece that I haven't been able to locate, so obviously I'm going to have to make a piece. But I come out here and now I have to determine which one of these pieces is going to fit into that notch. But I'm trying to really meticulously look. Now there's a piece in here, it looks like I have that piece. Like I found this little piece. See, I'm trying to tie in which corner goes up there. This corner goes here. And this will give me a little rigid platform, a little stub to work off. Here are some of these pieces I can get up underneath with my fingernails. And it's always a good idea, if you can, to start at one end and work to the other end. Don't start in the middle. This is just to tack it together. If you can get your fingers underneath, a lot of times you can get it almost back to the shape it was before impact. Oh, I had a piece here. I just put it down. How was it? I had a little piece of leading edge that I thought I could figure. Nope. See, I am missing some pieces here, although I don't know if this is going to be. This is going to be one that ties in. This is going to tie in right about there. So I need a couple of pieces of sheeting up top and bottom. See, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. I know you're laughing. I can hear it. Here's the other half of this rib. And this is going to go on, well, again, this is the part, it just takes time. There's nothing terrible here. I just need to find one piece at a time. And what I'm doing as I go along, just taking some thin CA now that I have this notched in, and just stiffening it up because I want to start working off one edge. Get some up in the front here too. Looks like we found another piece here from the jigsaw. Oh. Let me just get this tacked in. Okay, we're narrowing it down. Obviously, every time you add one piece from this pile, this pile gets bigger, and you get less and less choices. Now, hopefully, we're not going to be missing any critical parts that we don't have to make from scratch, and that'll be a real saving if we don't have to make any parts. Now, just a lucky guess that that goes in there. We are, I can tell by looking at this, because I've done this enough times, we are definitely missing some parts. And that's what's going to be the time-consuming part of this, is making parts. Now I had to take all the paint off. This is the gear block piece. And obviously this is one that I really want to make sure I get in there in the right spot. Boy, if we had every part, I know we're missing parts and we're gonna have to make them. Even if we had all the parts, it would just make this a whole lot easier. This alone is gonna make it a lot easier when I can get this going. As I'm doing this now, I have to start watching it. I'm not letting the wing drift down or up. I need to keep running a level on it, a straight edge. Now it's best not to really put a permanent glue joint on any of these in case they have to be broken loose. And I'm thinking, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking this may be a good test for this mat, this carbon mat. This is certainly going to be something that needs an extensive amount of reinforcement. We'll see if that, hey, if it doesn't work, at least we'll know about it. In this way, I'm fortunate. All the numbers are written on the ribs. And obviously that's 3/4, so I know that this little piece, like trying to build a bridge in midair. Come on. Amazing how the glue always goes off as soon as you put your finger by it. Come on. Go all day here. Anyway, now we can start looking for a half a rib. There's a piece in here somewhere. There's stuff left, of course. Now, if I can fit this piece in, even just get it, plus this will hold my alignment to some degree. But if there ever is one lesson to learn, you get a crash, get yourself a nice big garbage bag. Save even the smallest pieces that you think you'll never need. And I'm really not concerned with getting nice tight wood joints right now, because I will sand and fiberglass this all right back, the structural part of it. Now see, like that little piece there, I'm sure we don't have that piece. This will be a real challenge to get the structure right, but it'll give me an excuse. Two things is I can check that carbon mat out for my own, and I've heard both ways that it's really great and it's really junk, so I'll find out myself. No point even fooling around. Always, when you want to find something out, just do the test yourself and skip all the middlemen. Now what's kind of saving us here is we have the numbers on this. Remind me to put the numbers on all the ribs from now on. Now it looks like we need to fiddle a little bit, but this piece will eventually get fit in here. I think it needs to go sliding in this way. We're building up a little stub off of which we can hopefully get some alignment. And I know what you're probably thinking, oh boy, you got to get all these alignments and get all, yeah. First get the piece tack glued on, then worry about that stuff. Now I see one thing that I don't like here, and that is I stood back and I can see that, oh, here we are. I never got that piece in straight. Whoa, don't hit it too hard.
know, I'm hoping this will make the correction. Yeah, this looks like it'll be okay. Maybe not okay, just better.
I couldn't get it flush up in here, but I just got this tacked in. And now I can stand behind it and see just roughly if I'm going off in dihedral land or not. Here's a good trick to avoid gluing the flaps in and to keep some clearance in there. Just fold up some IBM cards or cardboard. Let that hold it in place, and then that'll give you some clearance, and if the glue gets in there, all you'll do is have to sand away the IBM card.
Well, it doesn't want to go in there. There we go.
Ooh, there's a lot of stress on this, so let me just tack this first. And what I'm doing is making little supports for here as I go along. See, this is broken because the grain is going in the wrong direction. Enough little pieces in here. I just want to see if this is going to be even close to a fit before I go any further. It's not going to be idiot proof, that's for sure. What I'm trying to do is just hold this on. It jumped out. Just hold this on with duct tape. Karen's been giving me a hand here. We're trying to make a loop of duct tape so we can kind of get the alignment the way we want it and get it tacked in position. Obviously, this is the point at which you have to improvise, and by constantly putting more or less tape around this, I should be able to get some kind of alignment before I tack it in place. Now I'm looking at this from every possible angle. I got duct tape on it, trying to get the alignment while that slow glue dries. And I can, by tightening or loosening the duct tape, I have just a complete loop of duct tape on there to hold it in place. And nothing really beats just looking at it with your eye. And I think that's real close now. So I'm going to put a little more glue on this little by little and then take the duct tape off and see what I have. Now the next step is I can take the duct tape off carefully, and I've really butchered up these parts. I'm still missing parts. I've just put little pieces to hold them together. So one by one I want to go over and patch these areas and try to make little plugs, fill this in. I'm only going to get to do this tonight. Tomorrow we'll work on the cosmetic stuff, but I want to fill those patches in. And I guess you can laugh all you want. This is going to be a flyable airplane again. That wing doesn't look too bad. In fact, it looks pretty good. Anyway, I don't know how many people can do these kind of repairs. I'm not so sure I can do them. Anyway, we are definitely going to give it our best shot. And that's, I guess in life, that's all you ever can get in, is your best shot. I'm going to make these plugs, and then we'll pick up the cosmetic work tomorrow. The tape is off, and what I wanted to do, I know this is still delicate because I don't have permanent glue joints on anything yet, but I always like to hang it from the lead outs. And then sight this way, sight right down the back. I got a little hook here, and this is convenient for hanging it by the lead outs. This is the best way I know of. You can have all the jigs and fixtures in the world you want, but not many things beat your just looking at it by eye. Okay, I'm gonna assume that's pretty close. And you know the telltale sign will be if we get this flying and it doesn't need a big giant trim tab. And even if it does, so what? Who cares? As of right now, it's almost a free aeroplane for somebody. If we had the pieces, and needless to say, I've looked around and we don't. I've looked for, I don't know, I'm sure this goes somewhere, but by the time I figure out where it goes, I probably could make a piece. And in here, I'm just going to back cut it like a cork and put pieces in that are bigger than these have to be. And then when I get to do the cosmetic part tomorrow, I'll block sand this all down, and if I have to, I'll replace all the cap strips with bigger cap strips, 1/8 inch, and then block sand them in. Again, I'll look at the cosmetic part of it. What I really want to get right is get all the structure right. A lot of reasons to fix these planes. This may be that someday this would be one of your favorite planes, or who knows, your killer airplane. Some personal reason you'd want to fix it, but I don't have a personal reason. I just want to fix it. Just want to have it back. And boy, if I had, I know I'm missing pieces here. Here's where it starts to make you crazy. It's all these little things. And you could go crazy trying to find these pieces. I don't think that's that. Nope. Missing so many of these parts. What's the easiest way to get around making a part? I gave this a little rough bend. When I say a rough bend, I just try to put some pressure on it and see what sounded like was going on here. And actually it didn't sound too bad. Of course, too bad is always relative. Now, trick here would be to cut for good up to about here. And if you understand how to make an undercut cork, the rest of it will really go easily. And what I'm going to do here is, last thing before I go upstairs, is get a block in here. And what I'll do is just undercut this, get rid of the little parts. I'm not looking to make it strong, I'm just looking, being it's the outboard wing, I'm not even worried about what it's going to weigh. But it would be easier and there'll be less joints to fill in. Look at this, this damn thing broke in one piece. It's easier to make a square joint. And while I have this open, I can get in here and reinforce this a little bit too. Uh-oh, President Nixon returns. All right, coming, honey, coming. Now, it may seem like a lot of work to cut this off. I'm just going to trace these side shapes and whack a lot of this off while it's in the saw. Again, I can get this, leave the line on, needless to say. And it'll be a lot easier to carve this piece than it will be to make 7 or 8 little baby patches. I can take the rest off with a big blade, just so there's less carving to do when it's actually glued right in place. This is called corking. Corking when you're doing body work. Yeah, I can even take some of this extra weight out here. I can hog that out too before I even put that in place. But then that only gives me one joint that I have to deal with. Now that's ready to just put right in. Now I'll make it plenty oversized, tack it in first. And I can do the final carving tomorrow when we go to do cosmetics. Maybe tonight I'll try to make up all the plugs that I can. And we'll probably have a whole day of cosmetic stuff before we're ready to do the glassing. Block sanding that all in tomorrow. If you put just a little bit of a draft angle on this, on all dimensions, one of the things it allows you to do is just set a piece of wood in place. And it'll go in just like a cork in a bottle. And we don't really care if it's a real nice fit right now. When we start sanding and filling and sanding and filling tomorrow, then we'll start getting fussy about this. But right now I think that's going to get us through. Okay, this is the end of today. And believe me, tomorrow when we get to block sanding this and knocking this all down, cleaning it all up, I think we got a good shot at making this a really good flyable airplane again. I really am optimistic. At the end of this day, and this is the day I would normally be depressed, I'm very optimistic. Okay, see you in the morning. Now going through the mail today, a lot of nice responses. We're already getting responses in for the carbon gear. Seems like Bill Hummel likes his, Claimer Metzer likes his. He even ordered another one, so hey. Looks like we're going to be making more and more of these, so I'm really excited about getting the molds going. Anyway, this is something I get every year, the Ghost Calendar. And this is a little advertisement, usually a little preview of what's in. I'll put the phone number on the screen. It's a good time of year to be thinking about it. Look at this. Look at these pictures. Ghosts of the sky. Just get some of these pictures here. You know why I like this stuff. Anyway, there's nice, real nice stuff. Here's their reply mail. Needless to say, we'll be ordering a few of these. If you don't have one, let's see, where's their 800 number? You don't think we're going to pay for a call here? Okay, here's the thing. You can get a catalog for free. 1-800-331-8231. Get an idea of some of the things coming up, and they do have some beautiful warbird photos. Great for, you know, when you don't want to repaint, you're sick and tired, you don't want to repaint the walls in your shop because it takes so long. You just get some thumbtacks and tack up about 12 of these posters like I do. There's a reason I have pictures all over the place here. I'm just too lazy to paint. I want to spend time modeling, not painting. Anyway, nice stuff. It's definitely a good investment in your inspiration level, especially like the Sea Fury here. Say I'm real happy to see how well received these gear are, but here's the bigger picture of this whole thing. I think we're going to be able to sell a lot of these in the future, and I want to make the molds as good as I possibly can and maintain them. Now, it's my own fault, and again, I always put the screw-ups on the video too. I was using the wrong wax, and this is the wax that I should be using with PVA. It's part all number 2. Ed Gallagher sent me a letter with, you know, he's watching the videos and he sees that I'm screwing up. So there's even another reason for video being a valuable modeling tool. Now, several people have sent me video of their flights, Jack Young for one, and had me critique them. There's a limited value to that, but there's definitely some value. Right now, I know Matt Newman is chasing down some kind of motor run problem, and if I had 1 minute of video, I probably would be a lot more help to him than we're doing about 200 emails already to try to solve the problem. But anyway, the point is, if you exchange information and share it, the whole world gets to be a better place. My feeling. Say it over and over again. Laugh all you want. And if you're the best flyer, you'll probably win anyway, whether you have carbon gear or carbon belt buckle or something. Anyway, now that we have the right wax, I know what the deal is. I'm going to start applying the PVA. I'll let this dry, buff it off. And while this is drying, it takes time for the PVA to dry, I can do some work on Strega. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, it's real funny. Every time this year I leave my nail clippers out Because what happens is when I'm doing fine sanding, my fingernails always take little bites out of things. And last night I wanted to do a little dressing off at a Spitfire, little leading edge and radius in the ribs while I'm doing this. And a fingernail caught the leading edge and took a chunk out. I said, oh boy, I went down and got the nail file. But it's just one of the things, if you tend to have long fingernails or whatever, it can ruin your whole day. And I remember, just a quick funny story, Lou Dudka buffing out his plane with fingernails, and he took a chunk right out of the somewhere at a leading edge or whatever, and I heard him screaming across the room. Anyway, the other thing too, with all this composite stuff, once somebody lays out how to do something in composite work, doing it is not that difficult. But getting there is like once somebody makes a map, gee whiz, anybody can cross the Atlantic Ocean if we had a map and a compass. If you don't have a map, you don't have a compass, and you don't know where you're going or how to get there, and you have a sinking lifeboat. And what's real good about this is if somebody's doing this and they can videotape their little project, hey, I'll put it on my tape and I'll critique, see maybe I can catch them using the wrong wax or PVA or something anyway. But prepping these molds, and this should be done on a regular basis, and I don't know how many parts. We've gotten about 30 parts out of these molds already. So probably every so often it needs to be stripped down. The reason I've gone to a black colored material, so I can pick up the flaws easier. The downside of using the clear was I couldn't see the flaws, and they would show up in the finished part. So we'll see how that wax release agent works with the PVA. Now we can work on Strega for a while. Now what I was doing is inspecting again, looking over the whole plane, and I found another crack in by the tail here that I'm going to do the same thing with the epoxy on. Try to get some epoxy down in there. The first one seems to have healed up. At least it's not so terribly obvious that we have a problem there. But rather than do it on tape, I'll just redundantly go over that the same way. And I want to start sanding off all these edges and things. I usually like to let it sit overnight and get another look at if this looks even half even. Well, I guess we're going to know as soon as we fly the plane. Now one thing I would definitely suggest anytime you're going to do this kind of a repair is you get to this point where everything is, I just call it's roughed in. We're going to replace a lot of this wood. I just have 2x4s holding things together just to get to this point. Obviously the first thing is to sight it from every possible angle. And to tell you the truth, it looks like we do have just a tad bit of dihedral. But again, I don't think that's going to keep the plane from flying. I've had other planes that, hey, being this is a test plane anyway, or it's going to be Peabody's plane, one or the other. Now I also want to do this, is I want to take and put a stress, just a little bit of a stress test to see if I can hear or see something cracking here. That feels okay, and obviously you want to do it in both dimensions too. Before you would go ahead and do all this work, it would be a shame if you pushed down and the wing fell off. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be fine. That's no more or no less than we get normal flexing. I also want to put some little reinforcements in by the gear blocks. But the first thing I want to do, I want to start shaving this leading edge. And now, most of what I'm going to be doing here is cosmetic. And I have a couple little tricks that are worth copying. And then when I get all the cosmetic done, I'm going to try to come up with some way of fiberglassing over this, because there's so many scars in the wood. Again, when you're at this point, it's not like you have all the choices. There are no more virgin brides. You just got to get a good wife. Good way to look at it, too. And no matter how fancy you try to make these patches, you got to block sand them down anyway. But most of this, now had I had more time last night, I would have worked on this later, but we're in a time of the year when you don't have a lot of extra time, so we're trying to really maximize it. And I say that over and over again, because if you can maximize even a small amount of time, you really come out ahead of the game. Then if you have a lot of time and you just plain waste it. First thing, obviously, get the block roughed in. Do the last little bit with some kind of a sanding block. But there's no point in doing any of this work if you don't have the structural part of it right. Give it the old structure test. And it may seem like there's a lot of butchery going on in here, and you're right, there is. But when we're all done and this is glassed, I can get in there with a Dremel tool and take a lot of these support pieces out if I want to. I can see how that's all going to look later. First thing, get all the big spots off. Now I can get a sanding block. Like I said, now I can answer the phone. Look, I just get a splinter from this. The technique I try to use, and again, you can't always use it. The technique I try to use is always a nice small block. These are ones that Bob Martin's made with the edge cut. And what this allows me to do, I don't want to sand any more of the sheeting off than I have to. But on the other hand, I want to make it as flat as possible so I'm not filling 16th-inch gaps with epoxy later. So I'm trying to blend into the paintwork. And it's not, I have already resigned myself to the fact this is not going to be a perfect blend somewhere in here. You know, you're going to obviously see the scar, but again, what I keep thinking is to build a plane from scratch. First off, you're talking about maybe $300 worth of material. You're also talking about a minimum of 100, 150 hours, or in my case, maybe 300 to build a plane, with no guarantee it's not going to be either tail heavy, or whatever. This plane, we know at least before the wing came off, was reasonable. Now what I try to do, once I get this that I can half feel that I'm getting close to being level. I get a paper towel, and what this does, it hardens the wood equally all around. And I just kind of paint the whole thing with thin CA and rub it in. And if you want to be a little time saver here, since we're not trying to make this a obviously I'm not going to make it a concourse winner. But if you pick this little technique up, and I'm just going to go right over every spot on the plane the same way, it hardens the wood up and allows you to get a reasonably nice sanding once you get it level. And just don't kick it off. Let it sit there. The dust in the tissue will kick it off. Just give that a couple minutes. Dry, and I can get some semblance of... This will allow me to pick up the high spots. And this is the point at which, if you were trying to reconcourse the plane, yeah, well, you know, you probably would want to spend a little more or a little less time here. We're going to abandon that approach and put all the time that we possibly can into the Spitfire. But again, we still don't want to abandon this plane, you know, we just... And I've been criticized. I have several people that have thought, crazy, just build a new plane. Well, it's okay too, but for me right now, coming up with $300, first of all, would be a little bit of an inconvenience. And this plane was made, another thing, with basically all my best wood. All that would be gone too. So, now let me just... You can see where the blend is, where I'm cutting into the silver. And this is not great, but I will try to get the glass to come right up to there and blend it in. Okay, that's the first of, now obviously we have to work our way over here. I'll work my way around the front and then around the back. Now I also want to get, I'm trying to feather into this part of the silk span that goes, because we have double silk span in the middle of this. Any little low spots here, I can just let them fill with sawdust. Go back over the joints. Right, back here. Boy, this is a tip worth its weight in gold. I wish I knew about this years ago. This makes blending in two unequal surfaces relatively easy. And I've shown this, I'll bet you, on 100 videos already, but everybody that tries it is always amazed how well it works. Just let the dust in the towel And I even want to get around the edge here, let it go capillary underneath the tissue. And just let that dry. Okay, now this part is relatively flat. I'm making sure I have no thin spots. And a good idea here is to just hold it up to the light. But here's a good trick too. Whenever you want to blend into where they used to be silk span, you need to get some CA underneath it before you even sand it. Because what'll happen, that'll pull up. And you'll just keep peeling it back like a banana that never ends. Again, the old trick, rub it and quickly. Don't hold it in one spot. And even after you sand it, go along that edge. Now this is all nice and smooth. I'm just going to do this edge and go out over the cap strip, then I'm going to start working on a trailing edge. Couple of things I'm going to have to do up here. I see I have to replace some cap strips, so I'll carefully strip them off. In fact, I'll replace this one. I'm going to replace them all. They're all shot. But I need to get this finish off the back here so I can get a good sanding. And one of the questions you always get asked by people is, how do you get the old finish off a plane? Gee, I have this plane. I want to refinish it. How do I get the old finish off? Well, there's a lot of times you can get a lot of it off just like that. Brand new XL blades are always a good idea. Cutting through hot stuff joints and stuff though really does dull them quicker than normal. And I'm trying to determine if there's any spots on here that might be, I might cut this from here, say, to here and lay in a new piece, just looking at this. Since I have to replace the cap strips anyway. With all those little joints in there, they're just holding it in position while I do the work. It's like if you've ever watched them build a house and they use 2x4s to hold a wall up while they're doing a wall construction. That's what we got, a lot of little pieces in there just holding things up. And that's how you get the finish off. I know I need to cut out a piece of this, so I want to make if I can, make a nice joint. I scored this with a ruler before, but I didn't go all the way through. And the next thing is to get these cap strips off. They've held it in position while we've gotten everything up. And this is definitely shot. I made this little piece, just made it a little bit oversized so I can spring it in place. Whoa, hey, that's the sound that you never want to hear. Can lay this in, get it kind of flat. The trick will be to tack it in first. And then I'll make up all new cap strips. I want to get all the dust and little chips off because I'm going to flip this over soon. I just want to try in those cap strips next. The reason for this is it's important to keep junk off the table now. And in my case, I don't want any sanding dust with carrying the heebie-jeebies.